My question is, why is one British company being favoured over all the other ventilating-making companies in Britain just because they texted the Prime Minister directly? That's my question.
OK, Liam Fox.
Well, I don't think they are is the answer to the question. I think that the government did what many in Parliament, including the Labour Party, said, which was to strain every sinew to ensure that we had enough ventilators to deal with the COVID crisis. I think if you had put this round the other way, given that this is referring to the Dyson question, if you'd put it round the other way and we'd got to this point and the government had said, we're not going to make exceptions for any overseas-based scientists or engineers or doctors, and we now face the accusation that the government put raising taxation before protecting lives, that genuinely would be a scandal. What we've heard today, I think, is very far short of that. I think that there's nothing remarkable here at all, other than the fact that we were actually able, as a country and as a government, to be able to provide the NHS with the number of ventilators that we did require, and we didn't see some of the dreadful scenes that we saw in other countries.
Now, it has to be said that I don't think any ventilators were, in the end, provided by James Dyson's company. But the fact of the matter is, he could have got a competitive advantage by the very fact that he just happened to have the Prime Minister's phone number. Should business people use private phone numbers for this kind of purpose?
Well, you say he could have. There's no evidence that he would have got any advantageous treatment other than the same that was being applied to other overseas business people and doctors and scientists and engineers. There was no favourable treatment as far as I can see. Move along. There's no story in this one.
Jeremy Corbyn, is there a story in this?
Yes, I think there is, because James Dyson, who is clearly a brilliant inventor and engineer, was using his contact with the Prime Minister to try to ensure that his senior staff didn't have to pay UK rate taxation whilst they were in Britain bringing the ventilators to production. The ventilators in the end were never bought anyway. This sort of strange exchange of texts where the Prime Minister says, sorted, I am the First Lord of the Treasury. Well, he is the First Lord of the Treasury. I would have thought, therefore, the Treasury should be making that decision. And if there is to be a tax exemption for very high-paid people in foreign companies because of COVID, then you should have come to Parliament and there should have been regulations passed to deal with it, as has happened in the past. I seem to remember various regulations surrounding the Olympics, I believe, and the Commonwealth Games after that. Surely it's just not right. And the Ministerial Code requires the Prime Minister to either have a civil servant with him at such a meeting, or if that isn't possible because it's a chance meeting, then to inform the appropriate civil servants immediately. It's not clear if he did that.
I interviewed Lucy Powell, Labour's shadow business minister, earlier, and she was making some of the points that you made there. But I wonder, I mean, you were leader of the Labour Party for 5 years. You must have had texts from people that had your phone number from before you were leader. I'm sure you might have had the odd text maybe from Len McCluskey, who might have said, Jeremy, got this problem, could you help sort it? And you would have then said to one of your colleagues, can you sort this? There's nothing wrong with that, is there?
Yeah, but being leader of the opposition and leader of a political party isn't quite the same thing, unfortunately, as being head of government, where you can basically instruct civil servants what to do. And I think the key words are ones where he said, I am First Lord of the Treasury, consider it sorted. In fact, it apparently wasn't ever sorted. It isn't clear whether the Prime Minister's word ever reached Rishi Sunak anyway. I mean, it sounds to me like a bit of a sort of matey discussion, which didn't come to anything anyway. But the idea that Dyson should ask for it, that is what I'm quite uncomfortable about. We have rates of tax in order to pay for public services like the National Health Service. And in any event, why wasn't there any form of tendering process done on all of this? I recognise it was a hurry, obviously, but some of the contracts that were let were just bizarre and very expensive, and we're all paying for it.
OK, Layla Moran, what do you make of this, particularly the phone number issue?
So on the one hand, and I think it's fair to say, all of us here have given our phone numbers to people who might have been involved in our parties at various points, supporters, friends, all the rest of it. There is a difference between journalists, indeed. You have mine, Iain.
I have all 4 of your numbers on my phone.
But there is a difference.
We have used it.
There's a difference between people who text you wanting to advocate on their behalf as members of Parliament, and then people texting government officials, the Prime Minister, in fact, asking them to solve a problem. And it feels very much like we have a 2-lane democracy at the moment. And I think that's the bit that feels a bit wrong, regardless of whether or not there was personal gain or not. There does very much seem to be a set of people in this country who do have Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak's phone numbers and can get stuff done and can get contracts awarded or things fixed in their tax affairs or whatever else. And then there's everyone else, which actually includes a lot of opposition MPs as well. I certainly do not have Boris Johnson's phone number, who struggle.
I can give it to you if you'd like it.
Maybe later, Iain. But nevertheless, my constituents, that's the bit that they struggle with. They contacted me all throughout the last year saying, I know there's this VIP lane for PPE contracts. I understand that there are people being awarded it without tender, without transparency. I can't get a look in. Can you help me? And of course I tried. But then as we've had the transparency down the line, it took me, Caroline Lucas and Debbie Abrams taking the government to court with the Good Law Project to reveal the fact that they had these contracts awarded, and we were then assured that they had all been publicly released, and unfortunately that was not the case. It wasn't the case. There was still about a dozen contracts that we hadn't seen. It's about transparency, Iain. It's not about people contacting people. I think people just want to know what's happened to their own money.
Stewart, Hosie, how concerned are you by this? Because I imagine that all politicians will, on some scale, be contacted by people who want something from them. It's actually how you handle it that's the most important thing, isn't it? That you've got to be not just doing the right thing, but be seen to be doing the right thing.
Well, that's absolutely right. Every single MP in government on the backbenches will be contacted by individuals, by campaign groups, by businesses, by trade organisations, looking for help on one issue or another, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's also the case, and I agree with Liam Fox, that it was also right that all governments busted gut at the beginning to make sure we didn't run out of things like ventilators. That's absolutely correct. What this case, though, demonstrates, and what the David Cameron contact with Rishi Sunak on the Greenshill case demonstrates, is a small number of people with privileged access. Now, the question for us all is, how do we deal with that? And Jeremy Corbyn made the point earlier. If the Ministerial Code insists when such a chance communication happens, it's immediately reported to the Permanent Secretary or put on some register somewhere. Now, I don't know if that happened either. It should do, because transparency is the great disinfectant for all this kind of stuff. And if we could be confident that when one of these privileged communications happened, it was properly recorded and quickly and available for the public to see, I think a lot of the anxiety about this and a lot of the bad smell it leaves, it would dissipate rather quickly.
Jeremy Corbyn, is there anything intrinsically wrong with a senior politician having the private mobile number of top business people or maybe top academics, top trade union leaders? There's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, is there?
No, we've all got phone numbers of lots of people, and we do have text messages from lots of people. It's how you deal with it and how you handle it. And if somebody's asking you to do something that is favourable commercially them, bypassing a process and a procedure, that's when it becomes questionable and it becomes wrong. If somebody has a problem over their pay or their benefits, they can't text Boris Johnson and say, please sort it out, because he wouldn't give them the time of day. But if you're a businessman of like Dyson apparently wanting to get some fast track process to avoid taxation of some of their staff. He seems to think that he can use that process. That is the area that concerns me.
Liam, when you were Defence Secretary, I mean, that has a huge procurement division. I imagine that there would have been people who might have been asking you to do things, not necessarily seeking favours, but lobbying you in a certain way.
Well, try being Trade and Investment Secretary, which covers almost the whole of the economy. Of course, people want to try to do it. The question is whether when people do come to raise legitimate concerns with you, for example, if my staff are disadvantaged by tax treatment, you may not get the ventilators you want. Turns out it wasn't the case anyway. But when these questions are asked of you, the question is therefore, can you show that they weren't given preferential treatment over other people because of that relationship? That I think, is what lies at the base of the ministerial code. I mean, clearly on the Dyson, this is a bit of a red herring, because James Dyson asked for something that actually was given to other people, but not to him in the end, and he was going to supply ventilators, which he didn't supply to the NHS anyway. The question, I think, is when people ask for special treatment, can ministers show that they acted in a fair, transparent way and ensure that they protect themselves by getting those records kept?
Let's get a quick reaction from Wakash, who asked the question originally. What's your view, Wakash?
My view is that being Boris Johnson as the leader of the country, he should have known the protocol and the SOP of how to deal with such a call. I work for a big global organization, and if I get a call from a customer asking for a favor, I have to report it back, even though I'm authorized to do so. And I work for just a global company, whereas Boris Johnson is as a leader of a country. It's just common sense, and it sounds very fishy and weird that he was taking decisions on the government's behalf beforehand while on the text saying that I will fix it, or I will do this for you, or I'm the Treasury. It's just totally wrong, I think, and I agree with the panel.
Wakash, thank you very much indeed. We'll come.